Sarah Mitchell pressed her back against the cold wall, both hands wrapped around her pregnant belly. The man in the $1,000 suit stepped closer, blocking the only exit. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," he said, his voice calm as a surgeon's blade. "That woman died because she refused to listen. Are you going to make the same mistake?" Sarah's voice came out stronger than she felt. "Get off my property." He laughed without warmth. "Your property. You paid $200 for a death sentence, Ms. Mitchell. And now you're carrying a child into the middle of it. How did a desperate, divorced pregnant woman with her last $200 end up facing down a billion-dollar corporation willing to kill for its secrets?" Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button and follow this journey to the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began. 3 weeks earlier. Sarah Mitchell counted the money for the 4th time, hoping the number would change. It didn't. $200. Crumpled bills spread across a motel bedspread that smelled like cigarettes and regret. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Buzzed again. She grabbed it. "Sarah, where are you?" Tamara's voice was sharp with worry. "Mrs. Patterson said you left yesterday. What happened?" "She needed the room back." "And she just kicked you out." "You're 7 months pregnant." "She gave me a week's notice. I found a motel. It's fine." "It's not fine. I can hear it in your voice. How much money do you have left?" Sarah closed her eyes. She was so tired of lying. $200. Silence. Then, "Pack your things. You're staying with me and Marcus. You have 2 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. We'll make room." "Tamara, I can't keep—" "Sarah." Her friend's voice cracked. "You're about to have a baby. You cannot do this alone." The tears came before Sarah could stop them. 6 months of holding everything together, and now it was all falling apart. "I'll figure something out," she whispered. "I always do." She hung up before Tamara could argue. Sarah lay back on the bed, one hand on her swollen belly. The baby kicked hard like she was trying to tell her mother something. "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know, baby girl. Mama's going to fix this." But how? She grabbed her phone and started scrolling. Apartment listings she couldn't afford. Jobs that wouldn't hire a woman about to go on maternity leave. Assistance programs with 6-month waiting lists. Then her thumb stopped on an ad she'd normally ignore. County tax auction. Abandoned properties. Starting bids as low as $100. She clicked it. Most properties started at $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. Way beyond her reach. But then she saw it. Lot 127. Victorian farmhouse on 2 acres. Vacant, 20+ years. Starting bid $150. The single photograph showed a house that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. Broken windows, sagging porch, vines crawling up the walls like they were trying to pull it underground. It was $150. Sarah sat up. Her heart was pounding. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. But $150 would leave her $50. And if she owned property, actual property, maybe she could figure out the rest. The auction was tomorrow morning. She didn't sleep that night. At 8:47 a.m., Sarah walked into the county courthouse, wearing the only nice thing she still owned, a navy blue maternity dress she'd bought for the baby shower that never happened. The auction room was packed. Men in expensive suits, women with designer bags. Everyone looked like they had money to burn and deals to make. Sarah found a seat in the back row, clutching a plain white envelope with her entire future inside. A man sat down next to her. 60s flannel shirt, work boots. He didn't look like the other bidders either. "First time?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Harold Jenkins, looking for a hunting cabin." He glanced at her belly. "You? A home." Harold's expression softened. "Well, good luck to you." The auctioneer took the podium. "Good morning. 37 properties today. Standard rules. All sales final. Let's begin. The first property sold for $42,000 in under 2 minutes. Sarah's hope began to sink. Property after property flew by. Commercial lots, residential parcels, farmland. Everything sold for thousands more than the starting bid. What was she thinking? Even if her house started at $150, it would probably go for lot 1 and 27. Sarah's head snapped up. Victorian farmhouse on 2 acres at 847 Hollow Creek Road. Vacant approximately 20 years. Significant structural damage. No utilities. Starting bid $150. The room went quiet. Sarah could feel people losing interest, checking their phones, whispering to each other. Do I have 150? Her hand shot up. 150 from the lady in back. Do I have 175? Silence. Sarah's heart was racing. Was this really happening? Was she about to 175? A man in the front row had raised his hand. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, with slicked back hair and a gold watch that caught the light. He turned around and looked directly at Sarah. Something in his eyes made her blood run cold. 175 from Mr. Dalton, the auctioneer said. Do I have 200? Sarah raised her hand. 200. Dalton smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You sure about that, sweetheart? 200, Sarah repeated louder. That house has a history, Dalton said, still watching her. People who go looking for trouble there tend to find it. Is that a threat? It's a friendly warning. 200 from the lady in back. The auctioneer cut in, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Dalton, do you have 225? The room held its breath. Dalton studied Sarah for a long moment. His eyes dropped to her pregnant belly, then back to her face. Nah. He waved his hand. Let her have it. I'm sure she knows what she's getting into. The gavel came down. Sold. Lot 127 for $200. Harold leaned over. Congratulations. You got yourself a house. But Sarah wasn't looking at Harold. She was watching Dalton, who had pulled out his phone and was typing something rapidly. He glanced up, caught her staring, and winked. Then he walked out of the room. Sarah made her way to the clerk's office on shaking legs. The clerk, an older woman named Dorothy, counted her money twice before pulling out a thick folder of paperwork. Sign here, here, and here. All sales are final. Any problems with the property are now yours. Sarah signed. Dorothy reached into a drawer and pulled out a rusty key. This should open the front door. May or may not work after all these years. Sarah took the key. The man who bid against me. Dalton. Do you know him? Dorothy's expression flickered. Marcus Dalton. He's bought several properties at these auctions over the years. Works for some company out of state. She paused. Why do you ask? He said something strange about the house having a history. Dorothy glanced around the office, then leaned closer. That's the Holloway place. Margaret Holloway lived there for almost 40 years. Brilliant woman. Died back in 2003. How did she die? Heart failure, officially. Dorothy's voice dropped. But she was only 58, healthy as a horse, and in her last weeks she was scared. Told people someone was watching her. Did anyone investigate? Sheriff ruled it natural causes. Case closed. Dorothy pressed the key into Sarah's palm. You be careful out there, honey. That house holds on to things. Sarah walked out of the courthouse into bright sunlight. She stood on the marble steps trying to process what had just happened. She owned a house. She, Sarah Mitchell, with exactly $0 left, now owned a house. A shadow fell across her. She looked up. Marcus Dalton was standing at the bottom of the steps, a phone pressed to his ear. When he saw her, he ended the call. Ms. Mitchell, he said pleasantly. Congratulations on your purchase. How do you know my name? Public record. You had to register to bid. He smiled that cold smile again. I just wanted to give you some advice, free of charge. I'm not interested. You should be. He stepped closer. That property has been empty for 20 years for a reason. Margaret Holloway thought she could keep secrets from people who don't like secrets. She was wrong. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly. Are you threatening me? I'm helping you. Sell the house. I'll give you $1,000 for it right now. Cash. That's 5 times what you paid. No. 2,000. I said no. Dalton's smile faded. You're making a mistake, Ms. Mitchell. A big one. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. When you change your mind, and you will call this number. He pressed the card into her hand and walked away. Sarah looked at the card. Plain white, just a phone number. No name, no company, nothing else. Her hands were shaking as she walked to her car. What had she gotten herself into? The drive to 847 Hollow Creek Road took 43 minutes. Sarah's old Honda made concerning noises the entire way, but she barely noticed. She was too busy checking her rearview mirror. A black SUV had been behind her since she left the courthouse. She turned left. The SUV turned left. She turned right. The SUV turned right. Her heart was pounding. She grabbed her phone and dialed Tamara. Sarah. Did you find a place? Listen to me. I bought a house, 847 Hollow Creek Road. If anything happens to me. What, Sarah? What are you talking about? What do you mean if anything happens? Just remember that address, 847 Hollow Creek Road. I have to go. She hung up as she turned onto the gravel driveway. In her mirror, she saw the black SUV slow down on the main road, then keep driving. She was alone. The driveway was more like a tunnel through overgrown trees. Branches scraped against her windows. The light grew dimmer. Then the trees opened up. Sarah stopped the car and stared. The house was worse than the photograph. So much worse. The porch looked like it would collapse if she breathed on it. Half the windows were shattered, the other half boarded up. The entire left side was covered in vines so thick she couldn't see the wall underneath. What have I done? She whispered. The baby kicked hard. I know, Sarah said. I know. But this is ours now. No one can take it away. She got out of the car. The property was completely silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. The front porch creaked dangerously as she stepped onto it. The boards sagged but held. The front door had a stained glass panel, cracked but beautiful. Flowers and leaves in deep reds and greens. Sarah pulled out the rusty key. Her hands were steady as she slid it into the lock. It stuck. She jiggled it, applied pressure, and felt something give way. The door swung open with a long, low creak. The smell hit her first. Dust. Decay. Something sweet underneath, like dried flowers. She stepped inside. The foyer was massive. A grand staircase curved upward into shadow. Debris covered the floor, plaster, dead leaves, animal droppings. But beneath the destruction, Sarah could see what the house had been. Hardwood floors, carved banisters, high ceilings with decorative molding. Someone had loved this place once. Hello, she called out. Her voice echoed and died. She moved deeper into the house. A parlor with a marble fireplace. A dining room with a table still set for dinner, everything covered in dust. A kitchen with ancient appliances, and a window overlooking what had once been a garden. Then she found the study. This room was different. The windows were intact, covered with heavy curtains. Bookshelves lined every wall, packed with volumes on botany, chemistry, medicine. A large desk dominated the center, covered in papers and dried plants. Sarah's eyes landed on a framed photograph. She picked it up and wiped away the dust. A woman looked back at her. 50s silver-streaked dark hair, striking eyes, one blue, one brown. She stood in a lush garden surrounded by plants. On the back, Margaret Holloway, Ph.D., The Garden Remembers. So you're Margaret, Sarah murmured. She set the photograph down. Her hand brushed a stack of papers, and the top page fluttered to the floor. Sarah picked it up. Official letterhead. Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. Dear Dr. Holloway, this letter serves as our final communication regarding your intellectual property. We strongly encourage you to reconsider our offer. Failure to cooperate may result in consequences. This is not a threat. It is a professional courtesy. Harrison Whitmore, Executive Vice President. The letter was dated September 15, 2003. Margaret Holloway had died in October 2003, 1 month later. Sarah's hands began to shake. A sound from somewhere in the house made her freeze, a creak, like a footstep. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Another creak, closer. Sarah grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the bookshelf and moved toward the doorway. "I know someone's there. This is my property. If you're trespassing—" "I'm not trespassing, dear." An elderly woman stepped out of the shadows. Silver hair in a neat bun, a carved wooden cane, sharp knowing eyes. "I'm Eleanor Price. I was Margaret's friend." Her gaze dropped to Sarah's belly, then back to her face. "And you must be the one who finally bought her house." Sarah didn't lower the candlestick. "How did you know I was here?" "I saw your car turn onto Hollow Creek Road. I've been watching that driveway for 20 years, waiting to see who would be brave enough or foolish enough to buy this place." "Why?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "Because Margaret asked me to, the night before she died." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "What happened to her? Really?" "Lower the candlestick, dear. We need to talk." Eleanor moved to the desk chair and sat down heavily. "And you need to understand what you've walked into before it's too late." Sarah hesitated, then lowered the candlestick, but kept it in her hand. "Margaret was brilliant," Eleanor began. PhD in biochemistry from Yale. Worked at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals for 15 years. She was on track to change the world. What happened? "She discovered something. A treatment for chronic pain, non-addictive, made from plant compounds." Eleanor's voice turned bitter. "Do you know about the opioid crisis, Sarah? 500,000 people dead. And companies like Whitmore made billions selling the drugs that killed them. Margaret found an alternative, something that could have saved all those lives." Eleanor leaned forward. "And Whitmore told her to bury it." Sarah felt sick. "Because it would hurt their profits." "Exactly. When Margaret refused, they destroyed her laboratory, made it look like an accident. She got a message the next day. Accidents happen to those who don't know when to stay quiet. So she came here. She spent 40 years recreating her research. She was so close to finishing." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Then she died. Heart failure, they said. But Margaret was healthy. She was scared. She told me someone was watching her." Sarah thought about the black SUV, about Marcus Dalton and his cold smile. "The man at the auction," she said slowly. "Dalton. He warned me about this house. He offered to buy it from me." Eleanor went very still. "Dalton Young. Dark hair, expensive watch." "Yes, you know him." Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph. She handed it to Sarah. Two men stood outside this very house. One was older, silver-haired. The other was younger. Sarah recognized him immediately. Marcus Dalton. "This was taken 2 weeks before Margaret died," Eleanor said. "The older man is Harrison Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. He visited Margaret 3 times that month trying to buy her research." Sarah stared at the photograph. Dalton was with him. He was Whitmore's assistant back then. Now he runs their special acquisitions department. Eleanor's voice was ice. "He handles problems that need to disappear." Sarah's blood ran cold. "He let me buy this house. He could have outbid me, but he didn't." "Because they've been waiting. 20 years they've been waiting for someone to find what Margaret hid." Eleanor gripped Sarah's arm. "They couldn't find it themselves. The house wouldn't let them." "What do you mean the house wouldn't let them?" "Margaret did something before she died. I don't know what. But every time Whitmore's people came to search, something went wrong. Equipment failed. People got hurt. They eventually gave up. Eleanor's eyes were intense. But they never stopped watching. And now you're here. Sarah looked around the study, at the books, the papers, the photograph of a woman who had died protecting her life's work. What did she hide? Eleanor pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. Margaret gave me this the night before she died. She said to give it to whoever finally bought the house, but only if they seemed like a good person who could finish what she started. Sarah took the paper. Her hands were trembling. It was a hand-drawn map of the house. An X marked one of the upstairs bedrooms. Next to it, begin here. There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. Something I never told anyone. Sarah looked up. The night Margaret died, I saw a car leaving her property. A black car. Eleanor's hands were shaking. I wrote down the license plate. It was registered to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn scrap of paper. Numbers and letters faded but legible. I've carried this for 20 years, Eleanor whispered, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Sarah stared at the license plate number, at the map in her other hand, at the photograph of Margaret Holloway and the men who had likely killed her. If I find what she hid, Sarah said slowly, they'll come for me, for my baby. Yes. And if I don't find it, if I walk away, then Margaret died for nothing. 500,000 people died for nothing. And Whitmore keeps making billions while more people die every day from drugs that shouldn't exist. Eleanor's voice cracked. I'm 83 years old, Sarah. I've waited 20 years for someone to finish what Margaret started. I thought I'd die before I saw justice. Sarah closed her eyes. She thought about her baby, about the life she wanted to give her daughter, about the world that child would grow up in, a world where corporations could murder scientists and cover it up for decades, a world where profit mattered more than lives, a world where people like Margaret Holloway died alone, their work buried forever. She opened her eyes. Tell me everything you know, Sarah said, and then show me where to start looking. Eleanor smiled through her tears. Margaret was right about this house. It does choose its people. She stood up and moved toward the door. The bedroom is upstairs, second door on the right. But Sarah, yes. Whatever you find, make copies. Hide them everywhere. Because once they know you're looking, they won't stop until they've silenced you. Eleanor paused at the doorway, the same way they silenced Margaret. Sarah followed Eleanor up the creaking staircase, the map clutched in one hand, the brass candlestick still in the other. The upstairs hallway was dark, the only light filtering through gaps in the boarded windows. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny ghosts. Second door on the right, Eleanor said, stopping at the top of the stairs. I'll wait here. Whatever Margaret left, she left for you to find. Sarah walked down the hallway. Her footsteps echoed on the worn floorboards. The door was closed. She reached for the handle. Sarah? Eleanor's voice stopped her. I should tell you, after Margaret died, I came here once. Tried to search this room myself. What happened? The door wouldn't open. Not stuck. Just wouldn't open. I tried for an hour. Eleanor's voice was strange. But you walked right up here like you belonged. Sarah looked at the door handle. It was cold under her fingers. She turned it. The door swung open easily. The bedroom was large with a bay window overlooking the gardens. A four-poster bed stood against one wall covered in dust and debris. An old vanity with a cracked mirror. A fireplace with an ornate mantel. According to the map, the X was near the fireplace. Sarah crossed the room. Her baby kicked hard like she was trying to tell her mother something. I know, Sarah whispered. We're close. She examined the fireplace. The mantel was carved with flowers and leaves similar to the stained glass in the front door. Beautiful, detailed work. She ran her fingers along the carvings. Something felt different, One of the roses was slightly raised. She pressed it. A soft click. A panel in the wall swung open. Sarah's heart stopped. Inside the hidden compartment was a leather satchel protected from the elements all these years. She pulled it out with trembling hands. Inside were 3 items: a leather-bound journal, a stack of photographs, and a small brass key. Sarah opened the journal to the first page. Property of Dr. Margaret Ann Holloway, October 2003. If you are reading this, I am likely dead. And you need to know the truth about Whitmore Pharmaceuticals and what they did to silence me. Sarah turned the page. My name is Margaret Holloway. For 20 years, I have been developing a non-addictive pain treatment that could save millions of lives. For 20 years, Whitmore Pharmaceuticals has tried to destroy my work. Tonight, Harrison Whitmore himself is coming to make me a final offer. I know what happens when I refuse, so I am hiding everything: my research, my evidence, my testimony. If you find this, you are now the guardian of a secret worth billions of dollars, and you are in terrible danger. Sarah's hands were shaking. She flipped through the pages. Formulas, diagrams, names and dates, evidence of threats, photographs of men in expensive suits standing outside this very house. And on the final page, a message: the key opens the laboratory. The laboratory holds the cure. Don't let them win. Finish what I started. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone who comes asking about this house. They have been waiting, and now they will come for you. Sarah looked at the brass key in her hand. A laboratory, hidden somewhere on this property, containing research that could change the world. Research that people had killed to suppress. From downstairs, she heard Eleanor's voice, sharp with alarm. Sarah, someone's coming. Sarah rushed to the window. Through the grime-covered glass, she could see a black SUV pulling up the driveway. The same SUV that had followed her from the courthouse. The driver's door opened. Marcus Dalton stepped out. He wasn't alone. 2 other men emerged from the vehicle. Big men. Men who looked like they were used to making problems disappear. Dalton looked up at the window. Their eyes met. He smiled. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know what you're looking for. Come outside and talk, or we'll come inside and take it. Your choice, Ms. Mitchell. Sarah looked at the journal in her hands. At the evidence that could bring down a billion-dollar corporation. At the key to a laboratory that held a cure worth millions of lives. She looked at her pregnant belly. Then she looked back out the window at Marcus Dalton and his men waiting for her to make a choice. 20 years ago, Margaret Holloway had faced this same moment, and Margaret Holloway had died. Sarah pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick. Okay, baby girl, she whispered. Mama's about to do something brave. She turned from the window and headed for the stairs, the journal clutched to her chest. She had no idea what she was going to do, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to let them win. Not today. Not ever. Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs just as the front door swung open. Marcus Dalton stepped inside like he owned the place. His 2 men flanked him, blocking any chance of escape through the front. Ms. Mitchell, Dalton said, his voice echoing in the foyer. I was hoping we could have a civilized conversation. Sarah clutched the journal tighter against her chest. Get out of my house. Your house. Dalton laughed softly. You've owned it for 3 hours, and you're already acting like you belong here. His eyes dropped to the journal. What did you find upstairs? Nothing that concerns you. Everything in this house concerns me. He took a step closer. Margaret Holloway stole something from my employer 20 years ago. Something valuable. We've been patient. We've waited. And now here you are, 7 months pregnant, thinking you can finish what she started. Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs. Leave her alone, Dalton. Dalton looked up, his expression shifting to something like amusement. Mrs. Price, still playing guardian after all these years? Margaret must have been a very good friend. She was a great woman, something you wouldn't understand. She was a thief, and thieves get what they deserve. Dalton returned his attention to Sarah. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to hand me that journal and whatever else you found. Then you're going to sign over this property to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. In exchange, we'll give you $50,000 and let you walk away. And if I refuse? Dalton's smile faded. Then things get complicated. For you, for your baby, for everyone you care about. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly. You're threatening my child. I'm offering you a choice. Take the money, disappear, and raise your daughter somewhere safe. Or stay here, dig into things you don't understand, and find out exactly how far we're willing to go to protect our interests. The baby kicked hard. Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not fear. Something else. Rage. Margaret Holloway created a cure that could save millions of lives. Sarah said, her voice steady. And your company buried it because it would hurt your profits. How many people have died because of what Whitmore did? How many families destroyed? Dalton's expression flickered. You've been reading her journal. I've been reading the truth. The truth. He laughed bitterly. The truth is that Margaret Holloway was a brilliant woman who made a brilliant discovery. And she was too naive to understand that the world doesn't work the way she wanted it to. Whitmore offered her millions. She refused. She chose to be a martyr instead of a millionaire. She chose to do the right thing. And look where it got her. Dalton stepped closer. Dead. Alone. Forgotten. Is that what you want for yourself, for your daughter? Sarah didn't move. I want you to leave my house. Last chance, Ms. Mitchell. Get out. Dalton sighed and nodded to his men. Search the house. Find everything she found. And if she tries to stop you... Don't hurt her, Eleanor called out sharply. She's pregnant. I'm aware. Dalton's eyes never left Sarah's face. But accidents happen to people who don't cooperate. Isn't that right, Mrs. Price? You remember what happened to Margaret. The two men moved forward. Sarah backed up until she hit the wall. Then Eleanor did something unexpected. She pulled out her phone and held it up. I'm live streaming this. Everything you just said, everything you're about to do. 300 people are watching right now. Dalton froze. His men stopped. You're bluffing, Dalton said. Check for yourself. Eleanor turned the phone to show the screen. Comments were scrolling rapidly. People asking what was happening. People saying they were calling the police. This is Sarah Mitchell, Eleanor said into the phone, her voice clear and strong. She just bought Margaret Holloway's house, and these men from Whitmore Pharmaceuticals are threatening her. They've admitted on camera that they're here to suppress evidence of a medical breakthrough that could save millions of lives. Dalton's face went white with fury. Turn that off. Make me. For a long moment, nobody moved. Sarah could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had actually called the police. Dalton heard them too. His jaw tightened. This isn't over, he said to Sarah. Not even close. He turned and walked out the front door. His men followed. Sarah's legs gave out. She slid down the wall and sat on the dusty floor, clutching the journal to her chest. Eleanor came down the stairs as fast as her old legs could carry her. Are you okay? Is the baby okay? I'm fine. We're fine. Sarah looked up at the older woman. Were you really live streaming? Eleanor showed her the phone. The screen was dark. Camera's been broken for 6 months. I was bluffing. Despite everything, Sarah laughed. It came out shaky and slightly hysterical. You just bluffed Marcus Dalton with a broken phone. Margaret taught me that the best weapon is the one your enemy thinks you have. Eleanor helped Sarah to her feet. But we don't have much time. The police will arrive, ask questions, and leave. Then Dalton will be back with lawyers and court orders and everything else money can buy. What do? We find the laboratory, tonight, before they can stop us. A knock at the door made them both jump. Sarah grabbed the candlestick again. Eleanor positioned herself behind her. Sarah Mitchell. A man's voice. Not Dalton. Who's there? Sarah called out. Daniel Cooper. I own the property next door. Eleanor called me while you were upstairs. Eleanor relaxed. It's okay. I did call him. Open the door. Sarah hesitated, then opened it. The man standing on the porch was in his mid-40s, with weathered skin and kind eyes. He wore work clothes and boots, and his hands were calloused in a way that suggested he actually used them. Ma'am, he said, nodding to Sarah. Then to Eleanor. I came as fast as I could. Saw that black SUV leaving. They finally made a move. They tried. Eleanor gestured for him to come inside. Sarah, this is Daniel Cooper. He's been helping me watch this property for years, and he has information you need to hear. Daniel stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His eyes swept the foyer, taking in the decay and the damage. So someone finally bought the place, he said quietly. I wondered when this day would come. You knew Margaret? Sarah asked. I knew her, and I know what she was working on. Daniel met Sarah's eyes. I was there the night she died. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. What? Not like that. Daniel held up his hands. I'm not one of them. I was trying to help her. She called me that night terrified, said Whitmore's people were coming for her, asked me to come over be a witness. By the time I got here, he swallowed hard. It was too late. What happened? I don't know exactly. The house was dark when I arrived. I found her in the study on the floor. She was already gone, and there was a man standing over her. Dalton. Sarah's grip on the journal tightened. You saw Dalton? He saw me too. Told me if I ever said a word about what I witnessed, my family would suffer. I had a wife back then. 2 kids. Daniel's voice was rough with old shame. So I kept quiet. I've been keeping quiet for 20 years. And now my wife's gone. Cancer 3 years ago. Kids are grown and moved away. Daniel looked at Sarah. And I'm tired of being a coward. Margaret deserved better than what I gave her. Maybe it's time I tried to make things right. Eleanor put a hand on his arm. You're here now. That's what matters. Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Another text from an unknown number. You have until midnight to reconsider. After that, no more offers. Only consequences. She showed it to the others. Daniel's expression hardened. They're not messing around. Then neither are we. Sarah held up the brass key from the journal. Margaret said this opens the laboratory. She hid her research there. Everything we need to bring Whitmore down. Do you know where the laboratory is? Daniel asked. The journal mentions a secondary location, hidden somewhere on the property. Sarah pulled out the journal and flipped through the pages. She writes about it in code, references to where the garden remembers and beneath the place where healing grows. Eleanor's eyes widened. The garden. Margaret's medicinal garden. It was behind the house near the old greenhouse. There's nothing there now, Daniel said. Just overgrown weeds and a collapsed structure. That we can see, Sarah said slowly. But Margaret was hiding from a billion-dollar corporation for 20 years. She wouldn't have built her laboratory somewhere obvious. They moved through the house to the back door. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown property. Sarah stepped outside and looked at what had once been a garden. Wild plants grew everywhere, but some of them weren't weeds. She recognized lavender, chamomile, plants that had medicinal properties. The garden remembers, she murmured. These plants, she was still growing them. Even after all this time, they're still here. Eleanor pointed toward a collapsed structure about 50 yards away. That was the greenhouse. Margaret spent most of her time there. They made their way through the overgrown vegetation. Sarah's belly made movement difficult, but she pushed forward. The greenhouse was nothing but a skeleton of rusted metal and broken glass. Whatever had been inside was long destroyed by weather and time. There's nothing here, Daniel said, frustrated. Sarah looked at the greenhouse, then at the ground beneath it. Not here. Beneath. She said, "Beneath the place where healing grows." She dropped to her knees and started pushing aside debris. "Sarah, you shouldn't—" Eleanor started. "Help me!" Daniel knelt beside her. They cleared away years of accumulated debris, dead plants, broken glass. Then Daniel's hand hit something solid. "Wait. There's something here." He swept away more dirt, revealing a metal surface. A door. Set flush with the ground, nearly invisible under the overgrowth. A keyhole glinted in the fading light. Sarah pulled out the brass key. Her hand was shaking. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where she hid everything." She inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet evening. Daniel grabbed the edge of the door and pulled. It swung upward, revealing concrete steps leading down into darkness. "I'll go first," Daniel said. "No." Sarah was already moving toward the steps. "This is my house. My responsibility." She descended into the darkness, one hand on the wall for balance, the other pressed against her belly. The smell hit her first. Not decay, but chemicals. Preservation. Something had been keeping this space intact. She reached the bottom of the stairs and felt along the wall. Her fingers found a switch. Light flooded the underground chamber. Sarah gasped. The laboratory was immaculate. Gleaming equipment. Organized shelves. Everything preserved as if Margaret had just stepped out for a moment. In the center of the room stood a workbench covered with notebooks, vials, and sealed containers. And against one wall, a small video camera sat on a tripod, pointed at an empty chair. "Oh my God," Eleanor breathed from behind her. "She built all of this by herself." Sarah moved to the workbench. The notebooks were labeled by year. The most recent one was dated October 2003. She opened it and began to read. The formulas were complex, far beyond her understanding, but the notes were clear. Final compound achieved. 94% efficacy in pain management. 0 addictive properties. Ready for clinical trials. All documentation complete. Evidence of Whitmore's suppression of original research included. Video testimony recorded. Everything is here. Everything they need to know the truth. Sarah looked at the video camera. "She recorded herself," Sarah said. "Her testimony. Everything that happened." Daniel found a small television and video player in the corner. Old technology, but functional. "There's a tape in the camera," he said. "Should I play it?" Sarah nodded. The screen flickered to life, and then Margaret Holloway appeared. She looked older than in the photograph, more tired, but her eyes were sharp, determined. "My name is Dr. Margaret Ann Holloway. The date is October 14th, 2003. I am recording this because I believe my life is in danger and I need the truth to survive, even if I don't." Sarah couldn't breathe. 20 years ago, I developed a non-addictive pain treatment while working at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. It could have revolutionized pain management and prevented millions of deaths from opioid addiction. Instead, Harrison Whitmore ordered me to destroy my research. When I refused, he destroyed my laboratory and threatened my life. Margaret paused, gathering herself. "I have spent 2 decades recreating that research, improving it, and documenting everything. The formula is complete. It works. And I have hidden copies of everything in this laboratory in a safety deposit box at First National Bank under the name Eleanor Price, and with a lawyer named Robert Chen in Louisville." Sarah and Eleanor exchanged looks. "If you are watching this, I am likely dead. Please understand that what I have created could save millions of lives. The opioid crisis has already killed hundreds of thousands of people, and it will kill hundreds of thousands more unless someone stops the pharmaceutical companies that profit from addiction." Margaret leaned closer to the camera. "I am not asking you to risk your life. I am asking you to tell the truth. Send this recording and my research to every news outlet, every government agency, every person you can reach. Make it impossible for Whitmore to suppress this again." She paused. "There is one more thing you should know. Harrison Whitmore has a son named Harrison Whitmore Jr. He is now the CEO of the company, and his assistant, a man named Marcus Dalton, is responsible for the elimination of at least 4 other scientists who threatened Whitmore's interests. If you cross them, they will try to kill you. Do not underestimate them. Do not trust them. And whatever you do not let them find this laboratory. The recording ended. Silence filled the underground chamber. Sarah turned to Eleanor. She put copies in a safety deposit box under your name. Eleanor looked stunned. I didn't know. She never told me. And a lawyer, Robert Chen in Louisville. Sarah pulled out her phone. No signal underground. We need to contact him, tonight. There's more here, Daniel said. He was examining the shelves. Files, photographs, recordings, decades of documentation. He pulled out a folder and opened it. His face went pale. What is it? Sarah asked. Records of other scientists who challenged Whitmore. 4 of them. All dead under suspicious circumstances. He held up a photograph. And Dalton is connected to every single case. Sarah felt sick. He's a serial killer. He's a corporate cleaner, Daniel said grimly. Whitmore pays him to make problems disappear, and he's very good at his job. Eleanor grabbed Sarah's arm. We need to get this evidence out of here, now, before they find a way to destroy it. Sarah nodded. We split up the files, make copies of everything, send them to different locations. I know a journalist, Daniel said. Used to be an investigative reporter before she retired. She's been looking for something like this for years. Call her, Sarah said. And I need to reach that lawyer in Louisville. They gathered armfuls of documents and began climbing the stairs. The sun had fully set now, and the property was dark. Sarah's phone finally found a signal at the top. She had 14 missed calls from Tamara, 3 from unknown numbers, and a voicemail. She played the voicemail. Dalton's voice. Ms. Mitchell, I know you found the laboratory. I know you have the files. You have 1 hour to bring everything to the front of the property or we're coming in. And this time we won't be asking nicely. Sarah checked the time. The message was 45 minutes old. They're coming, she said. We have 15 minutes. Daniel grabbed her arm. My truck's parked on the other side of the property. If we cut through the woods, we can get there before they reach the house. What about my car? Forget it. They're probably already watching the driveway. Eleanor took some of the files. I'll stay here. No, Sarah said firmly. They'll hurt you. I'm 83 years old. What are they going to do, kill me? Eleanor smiled grimly. Besides, someone needs to distract them. Give you time to escape. Eleanor. Margaret gave her life for this research. The least I can do is buy you a few minutes. She pressed something into Sarah's hand. A flash drive. I made a copy while you were watching the video. Everything on the computer. The formula, the testimony, everything. Sarah looked at the flash drive, then at Eleanor. I'll come back for you, she said. I promise. I know you will, dear. Now go. Save my friend's legacy. Daniel led Sarah into the darkness. They moved as quickly as her pregnant body allowed, pushing through overgrown brush and around fallen trees. Behind them, Sarah heard car engines. Headlights swept across the property. Dalton was here. They reached Daniel's truck just as they heard shouting from the direction of the house. Get in, Daniel said, yanking open the driver's door. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat, still clutching the files and the flash drive. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Daniel started the engine and pulled onto a dirt road without turning on his headlights. Where are we going? Sarah asked. I know a place. An old hunting cabin about 10 miles from here. No one knows about it. We can regroup there, make copies, contact the journalist and the lawyer. Sarah nodded. Then she felt something wet between her legs. She looked down. Daniel, she said, her voice suddenly very calm. We might have a problem. What kind of problem? I think my water just broke. Daniel nearly drove off the road. What? But you're only 7 months. I know how pregnant I am. Sarah gripped the dashboard as a contraction hit her. Just keep driving. We need to get somewhere safe. You need a hospital. If we go to a hospital, Dalton will find us. He has people everywhere. Sarah breathed through the pain. The cabin. How far? 8 minutes, maybe 10. Then drive faster. Daniel pressed the accelerator. The truck bounced along the dirt road, every jolt sending pain through Sarah's body. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. Hello? Ms. Mitchell. Dalton's voice was calm, almost pleasant. I have your elderly friend here. She's being quite uncooperative. I'm giving you one chance to turn around and bring back what you took. Otherwise, Mrs. Price is going to have a very unfortunate accident. Sarah's blood ran cold. If you hurt her, you'll what? You're 7 months pregnant, running through the woods in the dark with evidence that will destroy one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. You have no power here, Ms. Mitchell. None. Another contraction hit. Sarah bit back a scream. Tick-tock, Dalton said. You have 30 minutes to return. After that, well, accidents happen. The line went dead. Sarah looked at the phone in her hand, at the files in her lap, at the flash drive that contained everything Margaret had spent her life protecting. She thought about Eleanor facing Dalton alone. She thought about her daughter fighting to enter the world 2 months early. She thought about Margaret Holloway, who had died protecting the truth. And she made a decision. Give me your phone, she said to Daniel. What? Your phone. Now. Daniel handed it over without slowing down. Sarah dialed a number she had memorized from the journal. It rang 3 times. Then a voice answered. Robert Chen speaking. Mr. Chen, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I found Margaret Holloway's laboratory and her research. I have evidence that Whitmore Pharmaceuticals has been suppressing a cure for decades and murdering scientists who threaten to expose them. I'm sending you everything right now. Silence. Then, did you say Margaret Holloway? Yes. She said she left copies with you. I'm sending you the rest. Her video testimony, the formula, everything. Ms. Mitchell, I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. Chen's voice was trembling. Where are you? Are you safe? Not even close. Sarah started forwarding files from the flash drive to Chen's email. But I'm making sure the truth gets out. Whatever happens to me, you need to release this. All of it. To the press, to the FDA, to everyone. I will. I swear to you I will. Sarah ended the call and handed the phone back to Daniel. Done, she said. Whatever happens now, the truth is out there. Another contraction hit stronger than before. Sarah grabbed the door handle and squeezed until her knuckles went white. We're almost there, Daniel said. Just hold on. I don't have a choice. They pulled up to the cabin 5 minutes later. It was small, dark, hidden among the trees. Daniel helped Sarah inside and onto an old couch. He found blankets, towels, water. I need to call 911, he said. They'll trace the call. Dalton will find us. Sarah, you're in labor. 2 months early. The baby could be in danger. Sarah grabbed his arm. Listen to me. I grew up in foster care. I've been alone my whole life. I married a man who abandoned me the moment things got hard. I have spent the last 6 months fighting just to survive. Her voice cracked. But I am not going to let my daughter be born into a world where people like Dalton win. Do you understand? I am not going to let that happen. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said quietly. Then we do this your way. What do you need? I need you to call your journalist friend. Tell her everything. Send her the files. And then? Sarah felt another contraction building. She breathed through it, focusing on the pain using it. And then we figure out how to save Eleanor, and how to bring down Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. She looked at Daniel with fierce determination. And how to deliver a baby in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Daniel almost laughed. You're asking for a lot. I'm fighting for everything. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. Sarah lay back on the couch, one hand on her belly, feeling her daughter moving inside her, fighting to be born, fighting to live, just like her mother. "Hang on, baby girl," Sarah whispered. "We're almost there. Just hang on a little longer." In the distance, she could hear sirens. Helicopters. The sound of a manhunt beginning. Whitmore was pulling out all the stops now. But so was she. The next few hours would determine everything. Whether Eleanor lived or died. Whether the truth came out. Whether Sarah's daughter would be born into freedom or into danger. She closed her eyes and thought of Margaret Holloway, a woman who had given her life for a discovery that could save millions. "I won't let you down," Sarah whispered. "I promise." And somewhere in the darkness, she could have sworn she heard a voice whisper back, "I know." The contractions were coming faster now, barely 3 minutes apart. Sarah gripped the edge of the old couch, her knuckles white, her jaw clenched so tight she thought her teeth might crack. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It felt like her body was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. "The journalist is on her way," Daniel said, rushing back into the room. "She's bringing a camera crew. They'll be here in an hour." "I don't have an hour," Sarah gasped. Daniel's face went pale. "How close are you?" "Close. Too close." He knelt beside her, his hands shaking. "Sarah, I've delivered calves, horses, but I've never delivered a baby." "Then you're about to learn." Another contraction hit. Sarah screamed before she could stop herself. The sound echoed through the small cabin and disappeared into the darkness outside. Daniel grabbed towels from the bathroom. He boiled water on the old propane stove. His movements were frantic, desperate, the movements of a man who knew he was completely out of his depth. Sarah's phone buzzed. She grabbed it with trembling hands. A text from Robert Chen. "Files received. Contacting FBI and FDA tonight. Stay safe. Help is coming." Then another text from an unknown number. She opened it. A photograph of Eleanor bound to a chair, a bruise forming on her cheek. Dalton's voice in the accompanying audio message. 30 minutes are up, Ms. Mitchell. Since you chose not to return, Mrs. Price is going to help us find that laboratory, one way or another. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "No." "What is it?" Daniel asked. She showed him the photograph. Daniel's face hardened. "We have to go back. I'm in labor." "I know. But if we don't do something, they'll kill her." He grabbed his truck keys. "I'll go. You stay here. You can't fight them alone." "I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to negotiate." "Negotiate with what?" Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. "This. I've been recording everything since I arrived at the house. Every word Dalton said, every threat, every admission." Sarah stared at him. "You recorded them?" 20 years ago, I was too scared to speak up. I've been carrying a recorder ever since, waiting for another chance." His voice broke. "I owe Margaret that much. I owe Eleanor that much." "Daniel." "The journalist will be here in less than an hour. When she arrives, tell her everything. Give her the files. And if I don't come back—" He paused. "Make sure the truth comes out. All of it." He was gone before Sarah could argue. She lay back on the couch alone now, feeling her daughter fighting to enter a world that was trying to destroy them both. "Not yet, baby," she whispered. "Please, just hold on a little longer." But her body didn't listen. At 9:47 p.m., the contractions became unbearable. Sarah felt pressure building, pressure that told her the baby was coming, whether she was ready or not. She grabbed her phone and called 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "I'm in labor, 2 months early. I'm alone in a cabin off Route 7 about 10 miles past Hollow Creek Road. Please, I need help." "Stay on the line, ma'am. I'm dispatching an ambulance now. How far apart are your contractions?" "They're not apart anymore. The baby's coming now." "Okay. I need you to stay calm. Can you get to a flat surface? Sarah was already moving, half crawling to the floor, grabbing towels as she went. I'm on the floor. I can feel the baby. Oh God, I can feel her coming. That's okay. That's normal. I need you to breathe through the contractions. Don't push until I tell you. I don't think I can stop. You can. You're strong. Just breathe. Sarah breathed. She focused on the operator's voice, on the sound of sirens somewhere in the distance, on anything except the fear that was threatening to consume her. Then her body took over. She's coming, Sarah gasped. I have to push. Okay. On the next contraction, push as hard as you can. The contraction came like a wave, and Sarah pushed with everything she had. She screamed, she cried, she felt like she was being split in two. The head is out, the operator said, somehow calm. You're doing amazing. One more push. Sarah gathered what was left of her strength and pushed again. And then she heard it. A cry. Small and fragile, but unmistakably alive. Sarah looked down at the tiny creature she had just brought into the world. Red-faced, covered in blood and fluid, smaller than any baby should be. But breathing, crying, fighting. I have her, Sarah sobbed. I have my daughter. Wrap her in something warm. Keep her against your chest. The ambulance is 5 minutes out. Sarah wrapped her daughter in a towel and held her close. The baby's cries softened as she felt her mother's heartbeat. I've got you, Sarah whispered. I've got you, baby girl. You're safe now. But she knew that wasn't true. Not yet. Not while Dalton was still out there. Not while Eleanor was still in danger. The ambulance arrived at 10:03 p.m. 2 paramedics rushed in and immediately began checking the baby's vital signs. She's small, one of them said. Probably around 4 pounds. We need to get her to the NICU. Is she going to be okay? She's breathing on her own. That's a good sign. But she's premature. She needs specialized care. They loaded Sarah and the baby into the ambulance. As they pulled away from the cabin, Sarah saw headlights approaching from the opposite direction. Wait, she said. That might be someone I know. Ma'am, we can't wait. Your baby needs medical attention now. The ambulance accelerated, and the headlights disappeared behind them. Sarah held her daughter tighter and prayed that whoever was in that car would find her message. The files. The truth. The hospital was 20 minutes away, the longest 20 minutes of Sarah's life. The baby was taken to the NICU the moment they arrived. Sarah was wheeled into a room for examination, her body exhausted, but her mind racing. A doctor appeared. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Reeves. Your daughter is stable. She's small, but she's a fighter. Can I see her? In a little while. Right now you need to rest. I can't rest. There are people out there who want to hurt us. I need to make some calls. Dr. Reeves frowned. Ms. Mitchell, you just gave birth alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Your body has been through trauma. Whatever is happening, it can wait. It really can't. Before the doctor could argue, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. Ms. Mitchell. Dalton's voice. Congratulations on the baby. I hear it was quite a delivery. Sarah's blood froze. How do you know about that? I know everything. I know you sent files to Robert Chen. I know your friend Daniel tried to play hero and is currently unconscious in the back of my car. And I know exactly which hospital you're in right now. If you come here. I'm already here, 3rd floor, room 312. Dalton paused. But don't worry, I'm not here for you. I'm here for the baby. Sarah ripped out her IV and stood up. Ms. Mitchell. Dr. Reeves tried to stop her. You can't. Sarah pushed past him and ran into the hallway. Her legs were weak, her body screaming in protest, but she didn't stop. The NICU was on the 2nd floor. She took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the pain, ignoring everything except the image of Dalton standing over her daughter's incubator. She burst through the NICU doors. Dalton was there, standing next to her baby's incubator, looking down at the tiny form inside. Get away from her, Sarah said, her voice raw. Dalton turned slowly. There she is, the mother bear protecting her cub. He smiled that cold smile. Relax, Ms. Mitchell. I'm not going to hurt your daughter. Not unless I have to. What do you want? What I've always wanted. The research, the files, everything Margaret Holloway created. I already sent it to the lawyer. It's too late. Is it? Dalton pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. A news headline: Attorney Robert Chen found dead in Louisville office. Suspected heart attack. Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. Heart attacks are so unpredictable, Dalton said casually. Especially for men of a certain age. Such a tragedy. You killed him. I solved a problem. Just like I've been solving problems for 20 years. He gestured to the baby in the incubator. Your daughter is beautiful. So small. So fragile. It would be terrible if something happened to her. Sarah stepped forward. If you touch her, I will kill you. No, you won't. Because you're a mother now, and mothers protect their children above all else. Dalton's voice hardened. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to call the journalist who's on her way to that cabin and tell her it was all a misunderstanding. You're going to delete every copy of every file you have. And you're going to sign over that property to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. And if I refuse, then your daughter will have a very short life, and you'll spend whatever's left of yours knowing you could have saved her. Sarah looked at her baby. 4 pounds of hope and possibility. Innocent. Helpless. She looked at Dalton, who was watching her with the patient confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. And she made a decision. Okay, she said quietly. You win. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Just like that. Just like that. I can't fight you. I can't beat $1 billion corporation. All I can do is protect my daughter. Sarah's voice cracked. So tell me what I need to do. For a long moment, Dalton studied her, searching for deception, for hidden strength. He found nothing. Smart woman, he finally said. I'll have the paperwork drawn up tonight. In the meantime, you'll stay here under observation. If you try to contact anyone, if you try to run, if you do anything except exactly what I tell you, I understand. Good. Dalton straightened his jacket. I'll be in touch. He walked out of the NICU. Sarah stood motionless for a long moment. Then she collapsed into a chair beside her daughter's incubator, her body shaking with silent sobs. A nurse approached cautiously. Ma'am, are you okay? Sarah looked up. The nurse was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Jessica. I need to make a phone call, Sarah said. Can you help me? Of course. There's a phone at the nurse's station. No, not that kind of phone. Sarah grabbed the nurse's arm. I need you to listen to me very carefully. The man who just left, he's going to kill me and my baby if I don't do exactly what he says. But he's also responsible for murdering at least 5 people, including a scientist named Margaret Holloway and a lawyer named Robert Chen. Jessica's eyes went wide. Ma'am, I know you don't know me. I know this sounds insane, but I need you to trust me. I need you to help me, please. The nurse stared at her for a long moment. Sarah could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the instinct to walk away to pretend she hadn't heard anything to stay safe. Then Jessica glanced at the tiny baby in the incubator. What do you need? She asked quietly. Sarah closed her eyes in relief. I need you to make a phone call for me. From your personal phone, not the hospital's. Can you do that? Who am I calling? Sarah gave her Tamara's number. Tell her exactly what I'm about to tell you. Word for word. At 11:23 p.m., Tamara Williams burst through the emergency room doors of Memorial Hospital, her husband Marcus right behind her. She found Sarah in the NICU sitting beside her daughter's incubator, looking more exhausted than any human being should look. Sarah. Tamara rushed to her side. Oh my God, Sarah. Sarah looked up. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there. Something hard. Did you bring it? Sarah asked. Tamara nodded and pulled a small device from her purse. A burner phone. Untraceable. I also called the FBI field office in Louisville, Tamara said quietly. Told them everything the nurse told me. They're sending agents. How long? 2 hours, maybe less. I don't have 2 hours. Dalton's coming back with paperwork. He wants me to sign over everything. Marcus stepped forward. Then we get you out of here. I can't leave. My daughter's in the NICU. She's too fragile to move. Then we stay and fight. Sarah shook her head. You don't understand. These people have killed scientists, lawyers, anyone who gets in their way. They won't hesitate to kill all of us. So what do we do? Tamara asked desperately. Sarah looked at her daughter, at the tiny chest rising and falling with each precious breath. We buy time, she said. We stall. We make Dalton think he's won, and we pray the FBI gets here before he realizes the truth. What truth? Sarah smiled grimly. That I didn't delete the files. I made copies, dozens of copies. They're on their way to every major news outlet in the country right now. Tamara stared at her. When did you do that? In the ambulance, on the way here. Sarah's voice was quiet but fierce. Dalton thinks he's won. He thinks I'm broken. But I'm not broken. I'm a mother. And mothers don't break. They fight. At 12:07 a.m. Marcus spotted Dalton coming down the hallway. He's here, he whispered. Sarah straightened up in her chair. Tamara and Marcus positioned themselves on either side of her, trying to look natural, trying not to show their fear. Dalton entered the NICU with a folder under his arm. He stopped when he saw Sarah wasn't alone. Ms. Mitchell, I thought I made it clear that you weren't to contact anyone. These are my friends. They came to see the baby. Dalton studied Tamara and Marcus with cold eyes. How touching. But I'm afraid visiting hours are over. I need to speak with Ms. Mitchell privately. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of them, Sarah said. They're not leaving. Dalton's jaw tightened. Very well. I have the paperwork here. You'll sign over the property, confirm that you have no copies of any research materials, and agree to never speak publicly about Margaret Holloway or Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. And in exchange, you and your daughter get to live. He set the folder on the small table beside her. Simple as that. Sarah picked up the folder and opened it. Pages of legal text, clauses and subclauses and fine print designed to protect a corporation that had killed to keep its secrets. If I sign this, she said slowly, how do I know you won't hurt us anyway? You don't. But you don't have a choice either. Dalton glanced at his watch. Sign the papers, Ms. Mitchell. My patience is running thin. Sarah looked at Tamara, at Marcus, at her daughter. Then she picked up the pen. Wait. The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Daniel Cooper stood there, his face bruised, his clothes torn, but very much alive. And behind him stood Eleanor Price, leaning on her cane, her eyes blazing with defiance. What the hell? Dalton's composure cracked. How did you... Your men aren't as loyal as you think, Eleanor said. Especially when they realize their boss is about to be arrested for multiple murders. Dalton reached into his jacket, but before he could pull out whatever weapon he was reaching for, 2 men in FBI windbreakers appeared behind Daniel and Eleanor. Marcus Dalton, one of them said. FBI, you're under arrest. This is ridiculous, Dalton snarled. On what charges? Murder, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence. And that's just the beginning. The agent stepped forward with handcuffs. We've been building a case against Whitmore Pharmaceuticals for years. We just needed someone brave enough to give us the evidence we needed. Dalton's eyes shot to Sarah. You planned this. I survived this, Sarah said quietly. There's a difference. As the agents cuffed Dalton and led him away, Eleanor made her way to Sarah's side. You did it, Eleanor whispered. You actually did it. Sarah looked at her daughter, who had slept through the entire confrontation. "Not yet," she said, "but we're close." At 2:34 a.m., Sarah finally held her daughter for the first time. The baby was out of the incubator, now wrapped in a pink blanket, her tiny fingers curling around Sarah's thumb. "She needs a name," Tamara said softly. Sarah looked at Eleanor, who was watching from across the room with tears streaming down her face. "Margaret," Sarah said. "Her name is Margaret." Eleanor let out a sob. "Oh, Sarah." "Margaret Eleanor Mitchell." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "After the two bravest women I've ever known." The next 12 hours were a blur of interviews, statements, and revelations. The FBI raided Whitmore Pharmaceuticals' headquarters at dawn. Harrison Whitmore Jr. was arrested at his home at 6 a.m. still in his pajamas. Dozens of executives and board members were detained for questioning. The journalist Daniel had contacted Rachel Torres, broke the story on the morning news. Margaret Holloway's face appeared on screens across the country as Rachel detailed the decades-long cover-up, the murdered scientists, and the cure that had been suppressed for profit. By noon, Whitmore stock had dropped 67%. By evening, there were protests outside their corporate offices in 12 cities. And in a hospital room in rural Kentucky, Sarah Mitchell watched it all unfold on a small television screen, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. "You saved millions of lives today," Eleanor said from the chair beside her bed. "Margaret would be so proud." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't do anything. Margaret did the work. You kept her legacy alive. Daniel risked his life. I just got lucky." "There's no such thing as luck," Eleanor said firmly. "There's only courage meeting opportunity. And you had more courage than anyone I've ever met." A knock at the door interrupted them. A woman in a crisp suit entered, followed by two assistants. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Patricia Okonkwo from the National Institutes of Health. I've been reviewing Margaret Holloway's research." Sarah tensed. "And?" Dr. Okonkwo smiled. "It's remarkable. Her formula is even more effective than she documented. With proper clinical trials, we could have this treatment available to patients within 18 months. 18 months. The FDA is fast-tracking it. Given the circumstances, they want to move as quickly as possible." Dr. Okonkwo paused. "There's something else. Margaret's formula could potentially be adapted to treat other conditions. Chronic pain, inflammation, possibly even some forms of addiction." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She wanted to save people. That's all she ever wanted. And because of you, she finally will. That evening, Tamara helped Sarah prepare to leave the hospital. Baby Margaret was still in the NICU, but improving every day. The doctors expected she could go home within a few weeks. Home. Sarah thought about the abandoned house on Hollow Creek Road, about the broken windows and sagging porch and decades of neglect. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. "The house is a wreck. I have no money, no job, a premature baby who needs specialized care." Tamara took her hand. "You have us. And you have something else." "What?" "This." Tamara handed her a tablet showing a news article. The headline read, "GoFundMe for Hero Mom raises $2 million in 24 hours. Sarah stared at the screen. What? People want to help Sarah. Your story touched something in them. The single mom who risked everything to expose corruption and save lives. Tamara smiled. "You're a hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm just a mom who got lucky." "Stop saying that." Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Margaret believed the house would choose its guardian. It chose you. Not because you were lucky, but because you were exactly what she needed. Someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Sarah looked at the woman who had become family over the past few days. At the friend who had never given up on her. At the sleeping baby who had given her the strength to keep going. "Okay," she said quietly. Maybe I'm not just lucky. Maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. 2 weeks later, Sarah brought baby Margaret home to 847 Hollow Creek Road. The house was still a wreck, but volunteers had already begun work clearing debris, replacing windows, making it safe enough to occupy. Daniel had organized a crew of contractors. Eleanor had rallied the community. Even strangers showed up wanting to be part of the story. Sarah stood on the restored front porch, her daughter in her arms, looking out at the property that had changed her life. The medicinal gardens were being replanted. The greenhouse was being rebuilt. And in the underground laboratory, scientists from 3 universities were carefully cataloging and preserving Margaret Holloway's life's work. "You know what I've been thinking about," Sarah said to Eleanor, who stood beside her. "What's that, dear? That day at the auction, when Dalton let me win. He could have outbid me easily, but he didn't. No, he didn't. I've been trying to figure out why, and I think I finally understand." Sarah looked at Eleanor. He wanted someone to find Margaret's research, someone he could control, someone he could manipulate into giving him what he couldn't find himself. Probably. But he made a mistake. He saw a desperate pregnant woman with $200 and thought I'd be easy to break. Sarah smiled. He didn't count on me being Margaret's kind of stubborn. Eleanor laughed, a sound full of joy and grief and hope, all mixed together. "No," she said. "He certainly didn't count on that." Baby Margaret stirred in Sarah's arms, her tiny face scrunching up before settling back into sleep. "This is your home now," Sarah whispered to her daughter. "This is your legacy. And one day when you're old enough, I'll tell you the story of the woman you're named after. A woman who gave up everything so that millions of people could live without pain." She kissed her daughter's forehead. "And I'll tell you that when the world tried to bury the truth, a house in the middle of nowhere kept it safe, until someone brave enough came along to set it free." The sun was setting over Hollow Creek Road, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. And for the first time in her life, Sarah Mitchell wasn't running from anything. She was home. 3 months had passed since Dalton's arrest, and Sarah had almost started to believe the nightmare was over. She was wrong. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning while Sarah was feeding baby Margaret in the newly restored kitchen. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Agent Torres from the FBI. We have a situation." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of situation?" "Marcus Dalton escaped federal custody last night. We believe he's heading your way." The bottle slipped from Sarah's fingers and clattered to the floor. "How?" she whispered. "How is that possible?" "We're still investigating. He had help from inside, someone with access to the transport route." Agent Torres paused. "Ms. Mitchell, we're sending agents to your location, but until they arrive you need to get somewhere safe. Do you understand?" Sarah looked at her daughter peacefully drinking from her bottle, completely unaware that the monster who had threatened her life was now free. "I understand," Sarah said. "How long until your agents arrive?" 45 minutes, maybe an hour." "That's too long." "I know, I'm sorry. Just get out of the house. Go somewhere public. Don't tell anyone where you're going." Sarah ended the call and immediately dialed Daniel. "Dalton escaped," she said, before he could even say hello. "He's coming. I'm on my way. Don't move. The FBI said to leave. And go where Sarah, if Dalton wants to find you, he'll find you. Better to face him on ground we know than get caught somewhere unfamiliar." Sarah's mind was racing. "Eleanor. We need to warn Eleanor." "I'll call her. Just stay put. Lock the doors. I'll be there in 10 minutes." The line went dead. Sarah grabbed baby Margaret and moved through the house, checking locks, closing curtains. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely think. How had this happened? How had Dalton escaped from federal custody? Someone with access to the transport route, Agent Torres had said. Someone on the inside. Whitmore had people everywhere. Even after the arrests, even after the scandal, the company still had billions of dollars and decades of connections. They could buy judges, corrupt federal agents, make problems disappear. And Sarah was their biggest problem. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Did you miss me?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. Another text. "I told you there would be consequences. Now you get to watch everyone you love pay the price." She called Eleanor. No answer. Called again. Nothing. Come on," Sarah muttered, dialing again. This time someone picked up, but it wasn't Eleanor. "Hello, Ms. Mitchell." Dalton's voice, calm, amused. "Your friend is a little tied up at the moment. If you hurt her, you'll call the FBI. They're 45 minutes away. A lot can happen in 45 minutes. He paused. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring your daughter to the old greenhouse on your property. Just you, the baby, and everything Margaret Holloway left behind. No police. No Daniel Cooper. No one else. The research is already public. Killing me won't change anything. This isn't about the research anymore. This is about principle. You humiliated me. You destroyed my career. You took everything I spent 20 years building." Dalton's voice hardened. "So now I'm going to take everything from you. Please. Leave Eleanor out of this. She's an old woman. She never— 15 minutes, Ms. Mitchell. The greenhouse. Or I start removing Mrs. Price's fingers one by one." The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen, her daughter in her arms, her mind spinning through impossible choices. She couldn't call the FBI. They were too far away. She couldn't call Daniel. Dalton had been clear about that. She couldn't just hand over her baby to a murderer, but she couldn't let Eleanor die either. Think, Sarah told herself. Think like Margaret would have thought. Margaret had spent 20 years hiding from Whitmore. She had built secret compartments, hidden laboratories, created backup plans within backup plans. What would Margaret do? Sarah looked around the kitchen. At the walls that had been restored. At the floor that had been rebuilt. At the house that had protected its secrets for 2 decades. And suddenly, she knew. At 7:12 a.m., Sarah walked toward the rebuilt greenhouse, baby Margaret strapped to her chest in a carrier, a bag over her shoulder. The morning was cool and quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something terrible. She could see movement through the greenhouse windows. Shadows. At least 2 people, maybe more. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. Dalton was waiting for her. He looked different than before. Thinner. Harder. There was a wild edge in his eyes that hadn't been there during their previous encounters. Behind him, Eleanor sat bound to a chair, a gag in her mouth, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Her eyes widened when she saw Sarah and the baby. "Right on time," Dalton said. "I appreciate punctuality. Let Eleanor go. You have me now. I'll let her go when I'm satisfied that you've learned your lesson." Dalton stepped closer. "Where's the bag?" Sarah shrugged the bag off her shoulder and held it out. "Everything you asked for. Margaret's original notes. The formula variations she was working on. Everything that wasn't already released to the public." Dalton grabbed the bag and rifled through it. His expression shifted from suspicion to satisfaction. "Good. Very good." He looked up at Sarah. "See how easy that was? If you'd cooperated from the beginning, none of this would have been necessary." "Can I take Eleanor and go now?" Dalton laughed. "Go, Ms. Mitchell, you're not going anywhere. I told you this was about principle, about consequences." He pulled a gun from his waistband. "I'm going to kill Eleanor, then I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to take your baby and leave her somewhere no one will ever find her. The story will be that you lost your mind under the pressure and did something terrible, the hero mom who cracked." Sarah's arms tightened around her daughter. "You're insane." "I'm thorough. There's a difference." He raised the gun toward Eleanor. "Wait!" Sarah shouted. Dalton paused. "Any last words?" "Just one question. How did you escape? Who helped you? Dalton smiled. Now, why would I tell you that? Because it doesn't matter anymore. You're going to kill us anyway. And I'd like to know who else is involved. Who else I should hate? Something flickered across Dalton's face. Pride, maybe? Or arrogance? Fine. I'll give you that much. He lowered the gun slightly. Harrison Whitmore Sr., the old man himself. He may be 87 years old, but he still runs everything from behind the scenes. His son was just a figurehead, a puppet. Sarah felt a chill run through her. Harrison Sr. ordered my death. He ordered everyone's death. Margaret Holloway, Robert Chen, the 4 scientists before them, and now you. Dalton shrugged. The old man doesn't forgive, and he never forgets. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. Will he? He's 87, rich, powerful. By the time this goes to trial, he'll be dead of natural causes, and his legacy will be intact. Dalton raised the gun again. Which is more than I can say for yours. The shot came from behind Sarah. Dalton's eyes went wide. He looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest. The gun slipped from his fingers. He fell forward and didn't get up. Sarah spun around. Daniel Cooper stood in the doorway, a rifle in his hands, his face pale but determined. "I told you not to come," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "And I told you I wasn't going to let you face this alone." Daniel lowered the rifle. "Are you okay?" Sarah nodded, then rushed to Eleanor and began untying her restraints. The older woman was crying, her body trembling. "I'm sorry," Eleanor sobbed. "He was waiting at my house. I tried to warn you, but it's okay. It's over. You're safe now." But even as she said the words, Sarah knew it wasn't over. Not really. Harrison Whitmore Sr. was still out there, still pulling strings, still determined to destroy anyone who threatened his empire. And now he knew that Sarah Mitchell wouldn't be easy to kill. At 8:34 a.m., the FBI arrived in force. Agents swarmed the property, securing the scene, collecting evidence, taking statements. Dalton was pronounced dead at 8:47 a.m. Agent Torres pulled Sarah aside. "You should have called us immediately. You were 45 minutes away. Eleanor would have been dead. And you could have been killed. You and your baby both." Torres's expression softened slightly. "But I understand why you did what you did. And for what it's worth, you're incredibly brave." "I'm not brave. I'm a mother." "Sometimes those are the same thing." Torres handed Sarah a card. "We're going to need you to testify, not just about Dalton, about Harrison Whitmore Sr., his involvement in all of this. He ordered Dalton's escape. We believe so, and we believe he's been directing Whitmore's criminal activities for decades, even after he officially retired." Torres paused. "The problem is proving it. He's smart, he's careful, and he has very good lawyers. What do you need from me? Everything you have, every document Margaret collected, every recording, every piece of evidence that connects Harrison Sr. to the murders, the cover-up, all of it." Sarah thought about the bag she had given Dalton, the documents inside. "There might be something," she said slowly. Margaret was meticulous. She documented everything. If Harrison Sr. was involved back in 2003, she would have found evidence. Where would that evidence be? Sarah looked toward the house. "I don't know, but I think I know who might." At 10:15 a.m., Sarah sat down with Eleanor in the restored study. The older woman was still shaken, but her mind was sharp. "Margaret talked about Harrison Sr. once." Eleanor said, her voice quiet. "Just once. About a year before she died." "What did she say?" "She said that Harrison Jr. was cruel, but his father was evil. That the senior Whitmore had built his empire on bodies. Scientists who died suspiciously. Competitors who had accidents. Regulators who suddenly changed their positions after receiving large donations." "Did she have proof?" Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to remember. She said she was building a file, a master file. Everything she had ever collected about the Whitmore family. Names, dates, connections, payments. She opened her eyes. She called it her insurance policy. The laboratory? Maybe. Or maybe somewhere else. Margaret never kept all her eggs in one basket. Sarah thought about the hidden compartments she had found. The panel in the bedroom, the underground laboratory. Margaret had been a genius at hiding things in plain sight. The journal, Sarah said suddenly. The first one I found. There was a phrase I didn't understand. The garden remembers. I thought it was about the plants, but what if it meant something else? Eleanor's eyes widened. The garden. Of course. Margaret used to spend hours in the medicinal garden even after it was fully established. I always thought she was just tending the plants, but she was hiding something. They moved outside to the restored medicinal garden. The plants were thriving now, carefully tended by volunteers who had adopted the property as a community project. Sarah walked through the rows looking for anything unusual. Lavender, chamomile, echinacea, all the plants Margaret had cultivated for her research. Then she noticed something odd. One section of the garden was arranged differently than the others. The plants formed a pattern, a spiral leading to a central point. At the center was a large stone weathered by decades of exposure. "Help me move this," Sarah said. Daniel joined her, and together they rolled the stone aside. Underneath was a metal box sealed with wax to protect it from moisture. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a thick folder labeled Whitmore Family, the Complete Record. She opened it and began to read. The file was everything Eleanor had described, and more. 30 years of documentation. Names of scientists who had died under suspicious circumstances. Bank records showing payments to judges, politicians, law enforcement. Copies of threatening letters. Photographs of Harrison Sr. meeting with people who later turned up dead. And at the very back, a handwritten note from Margaret. If you're reading this, the truth has finally found its way into the right hands. Use it wisely. Harrison Whitmore Sr. is the head of the snake. Cut it off and the body will die. But be careful. He has survived this long by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone around him. Don't underestimate him. And don't trust anyone who has ever taken his money. Sarah looked up at Daniel and Eleanor. We have him, she said quietly. We have everything we need. At 2:23 p.m., Sarah hand-delivered the file to Agent Torres. The agent spent nearly an hour reading through it, her expression growing more serious with each page. This is incredible, she finally said. Margaret Holloway built a case that our entire department couldn't build in 20 years. Will it be enough? It should be. But Harrison Sr. has resources. He'll claim the documents are forged. He'll attack Margaret's credibility. He'll throw every lawyer and every dollar he has at making this go away. Then we need more, Sarah said. We need someone who was inside. Someone who saw what he did firsthand. Torres nodded slowly. There is one person. Someone we've been trying to flip for months. Who? Harrison Whitmore Jr. He's been in custody since the raid. He's facing 50 years in federal prison. Torres leaned forward. He hates his father, always has. Spent his whole life trying to earn approval that never came. If we could convince him to testify against Senior, you'd have everything you need. Exactly. Sarah thought for a moment. Let me talk to him. Torres stared at her. Excuse me. Let me talk to Harrison Jr. Father to, well, mother to child. Sarah's voice was steady. I know what it's like to be controlled by someone you're supposed to trust. To make terrible choices because you think you don't have any other option. Maybe I can reach him in a way you can't. Torres was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll make the call. At 4:45 p.m., Sarah walked into the Federal Detention Center, where Harrison Whitmore Jr. was being held. The man who had run one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world looked smaller than she expected. Thinner. Older. The arrogance she had seen in news footage was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. "Ms. Mitchell," he said as she sat down across from him. "I didn't expect to see you." "I didn't expect to be here." They sat in silence for a moment, measuring each other. "You killed Dalton," Harrison said finally. "Daniel Cooper killed Dalton. I just gave him the opportunity. He was a monster. I tried to fire him years ago, but my father refused, said he was too valuable." Harrison shook his head. "Too valuable. Like he was an asset instead of a human being. Your father ordered him to escape, to come after me and my daughter." "I know. I heard." Harrison met her eyes. "I'm sorry. For everything. Sorry doesn't bring back Margaret Holloway, or Robert Chen, or any of the others your company murdered." "No, it doesn't." Harrison's voice cracked. "I've spent my whole life doing what my father told me. Building what he wanted. Destroying what he feared. I told myself it was business. That I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Do they? When you're raised by a man like Harrison Whitmore, your choice is an illusion. You do what he says, or you suffer the consequences. I watched him destroy my mother, my sister, anyone who dared to defy him." Harrison's hands were shaking. "I was a coward. I know that, but I was also a victim." Sarah studied the man in front of her. He was a murderer by proxy, a criminal, a man who had presided over decades of corporate evil. But he was also something else. A broken child in a grown man's body, still desperate for approval from a father who would never give it. "The FBI wants you to testify against your father," Sarah said. "I know. Will you do it?" Harrison was silent for a long moment. "If I testify, he'll find a way to have me killed. Even from prison. Even from a hospital bed. He has people everywhere. He'll try to have you killed anyway. You're a liability now. A loose end." Sarah leaned forward. "The only way to stop him is to expose everything. To make sure the truth is so public, so undeniable, that killing you won't matter anymore. And if I do this, if I testify, then maybe you can start to make amends. Not for forgiveness. That's not mine to give. But for the chance to be something other than your father's puppet." Harrison closed his eyes. Tears streamed down his face. "I was 12 years old when I first saw him order someone's death," he whispered. "A researcher who threatened to go public about side effects in one of our drugs. My father made me watch, said it would teach me about business. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not looking for sympathy." Harrison opened his eyes. "I'll testify. Not because I deserve redemption, but because my father deserves to burn in hell for what he's done." At 6:17 p.m., Sarah left the detention center. Agent Torres was waiting in the parking lot. "How did it go?" "He'll testify. Full cooperation." Torres let out a breath she had clearly been holding. "You did it. You actually did it." "Not yet. We still have to win at trial." "With Harrison Jr.'s testimony, Margaret's files, and everything else we've collected?" Torres almost smiled. "Harrison Sr. doesn't stand a chance." Sarah should have felt relieved, triumphant even. Instead, she felt hollow. "It's been 3 months, she said quietly. 3 months since I bought that house. And in that time, I've been threatened, attacked, given birth alone in a cabin, watched a man get killed in front of me, and helped bring down a pharmaceutical empire. That's more than most people experience in a lifetime. I know. And I keep waiting for it to feel finished, for the story to be over." Sarah looked at Torres. "But it doesn't feel over. It feels like the beginning of something I can't see yet." Torres put a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe that's because it is. Margaret Holloway spent her whole life fighting for something bigger than herself. Maybe you're meant to continue that fight. I'm a single mother with a premature baby and a falling apart house. I'm not a crusader." Margaret wasn't a crusader either. She was a scientist who refused to look away when she saw something wrong. Torres squeezed her shoulder. Heroes don't choose to be heroes, Ms. Mitchell. They just do what needs to be done. Sarah drove home as the sun was setting. Baby Margaret was asleep in her car seat, exhausted from a day spent with Tamara, while her mother confronted murderers and convinced corporate executives to betray their fathers. As she pulled up the driveway, Sarah saw something that made her heart skip. A man was sitting on her front porch. She stopped the car, her hand reaching for her phone, ready to call 911. Then the man stood up and the setting sun illuminated his face. Derek, her ex-husband. The man who had abandoned her when she was 5 months pregnant. The man who had gambled away their savings, destroyed their credit, and left her with nothing but debt and despair. He looked older than she remembered. Thinner. There were dark circles under his eyes and a hesitancy in his posture that hadn't been there before. Sarah got out of the car slowly, her mind racing. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice flat. "Sarah," Derek's voice cracked. "I saw you on the news. I saw everything you did. I had to come." "You had to come now, after everything. After you left me pregnant and alone with nothing. I know I don't deserve to be here, but I needed to see you, to explain." "There's nothing to explain. You were a coward. You ran away when things got hard. End of story." Derek shook his head. "That's not the whole story. That's not why I left." "Then why did you abandon your wife and your unborn child?" "Because they made me." Sarah froze. "What? Whitmore? They made me leave." Derek's voice was shaking. "I got in over my head with gambling. Really over my head. I owed money to people who don't forgive debts. And then someone from Whitmore showed up. Said they would pay off everything I owed as long as I left you, and never came back." Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Why would Whitmore care about you?" "Because they were watching Margaret Holloway's house. They had been for years. And when they found out someone had been researching the property, digging into its history, they got nervous." "Someone was researching." "Me." Derek's eyes were filled with tears. "I was researching it, Sarah, before everything fell apart. I thought maybe it would be a good investment, an old property with potential. I didn't know about Margaret Holloway. I didn't know about any of it. But Whitmore did, and they saw me as a threat." Sarah's mind was spinning. "You're saying Whitmore paid you to abandon your pregnant wife because you looked up a property on the internet?" "I'm saying they were paranoid. They were watching that house like hawks waiting to see who might stumble across Margaret's secrets. When I started researching it, they panicked." Derek's voice broke. "They told me if I didn't leave, they would kill you. Both of you. They showed me pictures of what happened to other people who got in their way. I was terrified, Sarah. I thought I was protecting you. By destroying my life. By keeping you alive." Derek stepped forward. "I've spent the last 6 months in hell, hiding, running, watching the news, seeing what you accomplished, knowing that I could have been there with you. But I was too scared." Sarah stared at the man she had once loved, the man she had planned to spend her life with. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "Proof that Whitmore paid you to leave?" Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. A check stub dated 6 months ago, made out to Derek Mitchell, from a subsidiary of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. "They paid me $200,000 to disappear," Derek said. "And I took it because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Sarah took the check stub. Her hands were trembling. Another piece of evidence. Another thread connecting Whitmore to decades of conspiracy and control. "The FBI needs to see this," she said. "I know. That's why I'm here." Derek met her eyes. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. It won't make up for what I did, but maybe it will help." Sarah looked at her ex-husband, at the man who had broken her heart and abandoned her when she needed him most. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him that his excuses changed nothing, that he was still a coward who had chosen money over his family. But another part of her understood. She had seen what Whitmore was capable of. She had faced their threats, their violence, their ruthlessness. She knew how terrifying it was to be targeted by people with unlimited resources and no conscience. Derek had made a terrible choice, but he had made it out of fear, not malice. And fear was something Sarah understood very well. "Come inside," she finally said. "I'll call Agent Torres, and then you're going to tell me everything." As they walked into the house, baby Margaret started to cry. Sarah lifted her daughter from the car seat and held her close. "It's okay," she whispered. "Mama's here. Everything's going to be okay." But even as she said the words, she knew the truth was more complicated. Harrison Whitmore Sr. was still out there, still pulling strings, still determined to protect his empire at any cost. The trial was still months away. And now Derek was back, bringing with him a whole new dimension to a story Sarah thought she understood. She looked at her daughter's face, so small, so innocent, so completely dependent on a mother who had been through hell and back. "I promise you," Sarah said quietly. "I promise you I will end this, no matter what it takes." Baby Margaret stopped crying and looked up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. And Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that she would keep that promise. Whatever came next, whatever it cost. She would finish what Margaret Holloway had started. The trial of Harrison Whitmore Sr. began on a cold Monday morning in January, exactly 8 months after Sarah Mitchell had spent her last $200 on an abandoned house. The federal courthouse was surrounded by protesters, families who had lost loved ones to opioid addiction, scientists who had been silenced, journalists who had been threatened. They held signs with Margaret Holloway's face, with names of the dead, with demands for justice. Sarah walked through the crowd with baby Margaret in her arms. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Security guards cleared a path. "Ms. Mitchell, how do you feel about testifying today?" "Ms. Mitchell, do you think Harrison Sr. will be convicted?" "Ms. Mitchell, what would you say to Margaret Holloway if she were here?" Sarah stopped at that last question. She turned to face the reporter. "I would tell her that the garden remembered," Sarah said quietly. "And so did we." Inside the courthouse, Agent Torres met her at the security checkpoint. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah looked at her daughter, then at the courtroom doors ahead. "I've been ready for months." "Harrison Sr.'s lawyers are going to come at you hard. They'll attack your credibility, your motives, everything. Let them try." Torres almost smiled. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every eye watching. Harrison Whitmore Sr. sat at the defense table looking frail and harmless in his wheelchair. 87 years old. White hair, trembling hands, the picture of a grandfather wrongly accused. But Sarah knew better. She had read Margaret's files. She had seen the photographs, the bank records, the evidence of 40 years of calculated evil. The man in that wheelchair had ordered the deaths of at least a dozen people. He had suppressed a cure that could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. He had built an empire on suffering and called it business. And today, finally, he was going to answer for it. The prosecution's opening statement lasted 2 hours. They laid out the case methodically. The murdered scientists, the destroyed research, the bribed officials, the threats and intimidation that had silenced anyone who tried to expose the truth. Then the defense stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the lead attorney began, his voice smooth as silk. "You are about to hear a story, a compelling story, a dramatic story. But a story is not evidence, and evidence is what this case lacks." Sarah's hands tightened into fists. "My client is 87 years old. He has dedicated his life to developing medications that have helped millions of people. Yes, the pharmaceutical industry is imperfect. Yes, mistakes have been made. But to suggest that Harrison Whitmore Sr. personally ordered murders, that he orchestrated a decades-long conspiracy that is not just unproven, it is absurd. The attorney pointed at Sarah. The prosecution's star witness is a woman who bought an abandoned house for $200 and claims to have found evidence that the FBI couldn't uncover in 20 years. Is that credible? Or is that the fantasy of someone seeking attention and profit? Sarah felt the eyes of the courtroom on her, judging, doubting, but she didn't look away. The first witness was Harrison Whitmore Jr. He walked to the stand looking like a man who had aged 20 years in the past 8 months. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. His eyes were hollow. "Mr. Whitmore," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your relationship with your father?" "I was terrified of him," Harrison Jr. said quietly. "My entire life. Everything I did was to earn his approval, and I never succeeded." "Did your father ever discuss illegal activities with you?" "Objection," the defense attorney called out, leading the witness. "Overruled," the judge said. "The witness may answer." Harrison Jr. took a deep breath. "My father didn't discuss illegal activities. He ordered them, and he expected everyone around him to comply without question." "Can you give specific examples?" "In 1985, he ordered the destruction of Dr. Margaret Holloway's laboratory because her research threatened our opioid sales. In 1992, he had a competing researcher named Dr. James Foster killed and made it look like a car accident. In 2003, he ordered Marcus Dalton to handle Margaret Holloway permanently." Harrison Jr.'s voice cracked. "I was present for all of these discussions. I signed off on the payments. I am complicit in every single death." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel for order. Sarah watched Harrison Sr.'s face. For the first time, she saw something crack in his composure. A flicker of rage behind those watery eyes. The cross-examination was brutal. "Mr. Whitmore, isn't it true that you're testifying against your father in exchange for a reduced sentence?" "Yes." "So you have a personal incentive to lie." "I have a personal incentive to tell the truth." "Finally." "You expect this jury to believe that you witnessed multiple murders and said nothing for 40 years. I expect this jury to understand what it's like to be raised by a monster." Harrison Jr.'s voice rose. "I expect them to understand that fear can make cowards of anyone, and I expect them to see that I am trying too late to do the right thing." No further questions. Derek testified on the third day. Sarah hadn't spoken to him since the night he'd shown up on her porch. She had handed him over to the FBI and told him she needed time. Time to process. Time to decide if she could ever forgive him. Now she watched him take the stand, looking nervous but determined. "Mr. Mitchell, can you describe your contact with Whitmore Pharmaceuticals?" 6 months before my daughter was born, I was approached by a man named Thomas Reed. He said he represented certain business interests who were concerned about research I had been doing. "What research?" "I had been looking into the property at 847 Hollow Creek Road. I thought it might be a good investment. I had no idea about Margaret Holloway or her work. But Whitmore had been monitoring that property for 20 years, waiting to see if anyone got too close to the truth." "What did Mr. Reed offer you?" $200,000 to leave my wife and never contact her again. He said if I refused, they would kill us both. He showed me photographs of other people who had crossed Whitmore, scientists, lawyers, journalists. Derek's voice broke. I was terrified. I took the money and I ran. And I've regretted it every single day since. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She wiped them away angrily. "Do you have proof of this payment?" Derek produced the check stub. The courtroom stirred as it was entered into evidence. No further questions. The defense attorney stood slowly. "Mr. Mitchell, you abandoned your pregnant wife. You took $200,000 from people you claim were criminals. And now you're here asking this jury to believe you're a victim. I'm not asking them to believe anything. I'm telling them what happened." Isn't it true that you had a gambling addiction, that you had already destroyed your family's finances before Whitmore ever contacted you? Yes. So you were already planning to leave your wife. Whitmore just gave you a convenient excuse. No, I loved my wife. I still love her. I made terrible choices because I was weak and scared. But I didn't want to leave. They made me leave. Made you? Did they hold a gun to your head? They showed me what happened to people who said no. Derek's voice hardened. They showed me a photograph of Margaret Holloway's body, and they told me that's what would happen to Sarah if I didn't cooperate. Silence fell over the courtroom. No further questions, the defense attorney said quietly. On the 5th day, Sarah took the stand. She had rehearsed her testimony dozens of times with Agent Torres. She knew every question that would be asked, every document that would be referenced. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of sitting in that witness box, looking out at a courtroom full of strangers with Harrison Whitmore Sr. staring at her from 20 feet away. Ms. Mitchell, can you describe how you came to purchase the property at 847 Hollow Creek Road? Sarah told the story. The motel room, the $200, the auction, the house that no one else wanted. And what did you find inside that house? I found evidence that Dr. Margaret Holloway had developed a non-addictive pain treatment that could have saved millions of lives. And I found evidence that Whitmore Pharmaceuticals had suppressed that research, destroyed her original work, and ultimately murdered her to keep the truth from coming out. Can you describe this evidence? Sarah went through it all. The journal, the hidden laboratory, the files in the garden, Margaret's video testimony, the photographs of Harrison Sr. at the property. Document after document was entered into evidence. Hours passed. The jury listened intently. Then it was the defense's turn. Ms. Mitchell, you purchased an abandoned house for $200. Is that correct? Yes. And within weeks you claim to have discovered evidence of a 40-year conspiracy that the FBI, local law enforcement, and countless investigators had never found. Is that also correct? Yes. Doesn't that strike you as remarkably convenient? It strikes me as remarkably fortunate for Margaret Holloway's memory, for the families of everyone who died from opioid addiction, and for justice. The attorney smiled condescendingly. Ms. Mitchell, isn't it true that you were desperate when you bought that house? Divorced, pregnant, with no money and no prospects? Yes. And isn't it true that discovering this evidence has made you famous? That you've received millions of dollars in donations? That you're now a celebrity? Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. I was almost killed multiple times protecting this evidence. Marcus Dalton threatened to murder my newborn daughter. I gave birth alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere because I was running for my life. Whatever fame or money has come from this experience, I would trade it all in a heartbeat to have never been involved. And yet here you are, testifying against one of the most powerful men in America. Don't you find it suspicious that all of this evidence just happened to fall into your lap? Sarah leaned forward. I don't find it suspicious at all. I find it inevitable. Margaret Holloway spent 20 years hiding the truth, waiting for the right person to find it. She believed the house would choose its guardian. Maybe that sounds crazy, but I'm sitting here today and Harrison Whitmore Sr. is facing justice for the first time in his life. So maybe Margaret knew exactly what she was doing. The attorney had no response. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 6 days. 6 days of waiting, of pacing, of jumping every time her phone buzzed. Sarah spent most of that time at the house working in Margaret's restored medicinal garden, trying to keep her mind occupied. Eleanor was with her constantly. So was Daniel. Even Tamara and Marcus came to stay, bringing their kids to play with baby Margaret. On the morning of the 7th day, Agent Torres called. The jury has reached a verdict. Get to the courthouse. The drive took forever. Traffic, red lights, every second stretching into eternity. Sarah arrived just as the judge was calling the court to order. She slipped into a seat in the back row, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have your honor. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, how does the jury find guilty? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. On the count of obstruction of justice, how does the jury find guilty? On the count of racketeering, how does the jury find guilty? Count after count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 18 counts in total. Guilty on every single one. Harrison Whitmore Sr. sat motionless as the verdicts were read. His face showed nothing. No emotion, no reaction. Just the cold, empty stare of a man who had finally run out of moves. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks later. Sarah walked out of the courthouse into a wall of cameras and microphones. Ms. Mitchell, how do you feel about the verdict? She stopped on the courthouse steps and looked at the crowd. At the families of opioid victims. At the scientists who had been silenced. At the journalists who had helped tell this story. I feel like justice was finally served, she said. Not just for Margaret Holloway, but for every person whose life was destroyed by corporate greed. This verdict sends a message: no one is above the law. No amount of money can buy your way out of accountability. And the truth, no matter how long it's buried, will eventually come to light. A reporter pushed forward. What's next for you, Ms. Mitchell? Sarah thought about the house, about the laboratory being transformed into a research center, about Margaret's formula now in clinical trials, about her daughter who would grow up knowing her name came from a hero. Next, she said, I'm going to finish what Margaret Holloway started. I'm going to make sure her cure reaches everyone who needs it. And I'm going to make sure no one ever forgets what she sacrificed. Harrison Whitmore Sr. was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He died 3 weeks later in the prison infirmary of cardiac arrest. Some said it was karma. Others said it was too easy an end for a man responsible for so much suffering. Sarah didn't know what to think. She was just glad it was over. In the months that followed, things began to change. Margaret's formula completed clinical trials with extraordinary results. The FDA approved it as a non-addictive alternative to opioid pain medication, just as Margaret had always intended. But Sarah made sure it wasn't patented by any corporation. Instead, it was released as a generic medication available at low cost to anyone who needed it. Within a year, opioid prescriptions dropped by 30%. Overdose deaths began to decline for the first time in 2 decades. Thousands of people who would have become addicted never did. Margaret Holloway's life's work was finally changing the world. The house at 847 Hollow Creek Road was formally renamed the Margaret Holloway Center for Ethical Medicine. It became a research facility, a museum, and a community health clinic all in one. Scientists from around the world came to study Margaret's methods. Families affected by the opioid crisis came to pay their respects. Students came to learn about the woman who had given everything for the truth. Sarah served as the center's director, a role she had never imagined for herself, but that somehow felt exactly right. She hired Eleanor as the center's historian, documenting Margaret's life and work for future generations. She hired Daniel as the facilities manager, keeping the property maintained and the gardens thriving. She even found a role for Derek, working with the center's outreach program, helping families affected by addiction find resources and support. They hadn't reconciled as a couple. Sarah wasn't sure they ever would. But she had found a way to forgive him, and he had found a way to make amends. That was enough. On the 1-year anniversary of the day Sarah had bought the house, a ceremony was held at the center. Hundreds of people attended: scientists, activists, families, journalists, politicians. And at the front of the crowd, Sarah stood with baby Margaret in her arms. 1 year ago, Sarah said into the microphone, I walked into a county auction with $200 in my pocket and no idea what I was doing. I was desperate, scared, alone. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. I bought a house that everyone said was cursed, and in a way it was. It held the memory of a brilliant woman who had been murdered for trying to save lives. It held evidence of crimes that powerful people had spent decades covering up. It held secrets that had cost too many people everything. Baby Margaret gurgled happily, unaware of the significance of the moment. But that house also held hope, Sarah continued. It held Margaret Holloway's life's work, her formula, her dream of a world where people didn't have to choose between pain and addiction. And it held a message for whoever was brave enough to find it. The truth matters. Justice matters. One person can make a difference. She looked down at her daughter. I named my daughter Margaret, after the woman who made all of this possible. And when she's old enough, I'll tell her the story of how her mother bought a haunted house for $200 and found a miracle inside. I'll tell her that sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest decisions. And I'll tell her that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. Sarah looked back at the crowd. Margaret Holloway didn't live to see her work save lives, but today, because of what she sacrificed, millions of people will never experience the suffering she tried to prevent. That is her legacy. That is what we honor today. And that is what this center will carry forward for generations to come. The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah stepped away from the podium, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor was waiting for her, her own eyes glistening. Margaret would be so proud, Eleanor whispered. I hope so, Sarah said. I hope wherever she is, she knows we finished what she started. That night after the ceremony ended and the crowds went home, Sarah sat alone in Margaret's study. The room had been restored beautifully. Margaret's books back on the shelves. Her desk polished and preserved. Her photograph in its original frame. Baby Margaret was asleep upstairs, watched over by Tamara. Sarah looked at the photograph of Margaret Holloway, at those striking mismatched eyes, at the slight smile on her lips. I don't know if you can hear me, Sarah said softly, but I wanted to thank you for trusting me with your secrets, for believing that someone would come along who could finish your work. She paused, remembering everything that had happened, the terror, the triumph, the impossible journey from that motel room to this moment. I was nobody when I bought this house, a divorced pregnant woman with $200 and no future. But you gave me something to fight for. You gave me a purpose, and you gave my daughter a legacy she can be proud of. Sarah stood and walked to the window. Outside, the medicinal garden was bathed in moonlight. The plants Margaret had cultivated decades ago were thriving again, tended by volunteers who came from all over the country. Your garden remembers, Sarah whispered, just like you said it would, and so do we. A gentle breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of lavender and rosemary. For just a moment, Sarah felt a presence beside her. Not frightening, not intrusive, just there. She turned her head slightly, and for the briefest instant, she could have sworn she saw a woman, with silver-streaked hair and mismatched eyes, standing in the corner of the room smiling. Then the vision faded, and Sarah was alone again. But she wasn't sad, she wasn't scared, she was grateful. Because Margaret Holloway had given her something priceless. Not just a house or a mission or a legacy. She had given her hope. And hope, Sarah had learned, was the most powerful force in the world. 5 years later, Sarah Mitchell stood on the front porch of the Margaret Holloway Center watching the sunrise. Baby Margaret wasn't a baby anymore. She was 5 years old now, bright and curious and fearless, already asking questions about the woman she was named after. The center had grown beyond anything Sarah had imagined. 3 new buildings, a full medical research wing, an addiction treatment facility, a training program for young scientists from underserved communities. Margaret's formula had been used by over 20 million people. Opioid addiction rates had dropped by 45%. Overdose deaths were at their lowest point in 30 years. And it was all because of a woman who had refused to stay silent, who had hidden the truth and waited for someone brave enough to find it. Eleanor had passed away 2 years ago peacefully in her sleep. She was buried in the medicinal garden next to a monument to Margaret Holloway. The inscription read, "She kept the faith." Daniel had married a woman he met at the center, a researcher named Julia, who shared his love of the land. They lived in the cottage on the property, raising their twin sons alongside little Margaret. Derek had moved to California working with addiction recovery programs there. He and Sarah stayed in touch. Not as a couple, but as co-parents, as friends, as two people who had been through hell together and emerged, if not whole, at least at peace. Tamara and Marcus visited often, their children, now teenagers, who loved spending summers at the center, learning about medicinal plants and the woman who had changed the world. And Sarah. Sarah had become exactly what she never expected to be: a leader, an advocate, a symbol of what one person could accomplish when they refused to give up. She had been invited to speak at the United Nations. She had testified before Congress. She had met with presidents and prime ministers and CEOs of pharmaceutical companies who now used Margaret's research as a model for ethical drug development. But her favorite moments were still the quiet ones. Sitting in Margaret's study, reading her journals, feeling connected to a woman she had never met, but who had shaped her entire life. Little Margaret came running out onto the porch, her dark hair bouncing, her mismatched eyes shining in the morning light. Mismatched eyes. One blue, one brown. Just like the woman she was named after. Sarah still remembered the moment she had first noticed when Margaret was 6 months old. She had called Eleanor immediately, crying, unable to believe what she was seeing. "It's not possible," she had said. "It's not genetically possible." Eleanor had just laughed. "With this house, dear, anything is possible." Now little Margaret tugged at her mother's hand. "Mama, can we visit Aunt Margaret's garden today?" That's what she called it. Aunt Margaret's garden. Like the woman who had died before she was born was still part of the family. "Of course we can, baby girl." They walked hand in hand through the restored property, past the greenhouse where Sarah had almost died, past the spot where Eleanor was buried, past the monument to Margaret Holloway that visitors came from all over the world to see. Little Margaret stopped at her favorite plant, a lavender bush that somehow bloomed year-round, even in winter. "Mama, why did Aunt Margaret hide everything in the house?" Sarah knelt down beside her daughter. Because she was protecting something important, something that could help a lot of people, and she knew that one day the right person would come along and find it. "Were you the right person, Mama?" Sarah thought about that question, about the desperate woman she had been 5 years ago, about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. "I don't know if I was the right person," she said honestly, "but I was the person who showed up, and sometimes that's all it takes." Little Margaret nodded seriously, absorbing this wisdom with the gravity that only a 5-year-old can muster. "When I grow up," she said, "I want to help people too, like Aunt Margaret, like you." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled her daughter into a hug. "You already do, baby girl. Every single day, just by being you." They stayed in the garden until the sun was fully up, then walked back to the house together. As they climbed the porch steps, little Margaret suddenly stopped. "Mama, who's that lady in the window?" Sarah looked up. The upstairs window. Margaret Holloway's bedroom. For just a moment she saw her. A woman with silver-streaked hair and mismatched eyes standing at the window watching them with a smile. Then she was gone. Sarah's heart was pounding, but not with fear, never with fear. "That's just Aunt Margaret," she said softly, "checking in on us." Little Margaret nodded, satisfied with this answer. "She's pretty." Yes, she was. Very pretty. Sarah took her daughter's hand. "Come on, let's go make breakfast." They went inside together into the house that had once been abandoned and was now full of life. The house that had held on to its secrets for 20 years, waiting for someone brave enough to find them. The house that had chosen its guardian and had never been wrong. That evening, after little Margaret was asleep, Sarah sat down at her desk to write. She had been working on a book for 3 years now. The full story of Margaret Holloway told from her own journals and research, combined with everything that had happened since Sarah bought the house. Tonight, she finally wrote the last chapter. Margaret Holloway never knew the impact her work would have. She died believing she had failed, believing her research would be buried forever, believing that the powerful forces aligned against her would ultimately win. She was wrong. Her formula has now helped over 50 million people manage pain without addiction. Her research methods are taught in medical schools around the world. Her story is studied by ethics students, business students, anyone who wants to understand how one person can change the course of history. But more than that, Margaret Holloway showed us what courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right even when you're terrified. Not the guarantee of success, but the refusal to give up even when success seems impossible. She hid the truth in a house that everyone said was cursed. She trusted that someone would find it, and she was right. I don't know why the house chose me. I was nobody. I had nothing. I was 7 months pregnant with $200 to my name. But maybe that's exactly why. Maybe Margaret knew that the person who would finish her work wouldn't be a hero, wouldn't be someone special, would just be a desperate mother who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Maybe she knew that's where true courage comes from. Not from strength, but from desperation. Not from certainty, but from hope. Not from having everything, but from risking the little you have left. This is my story. But more than that, it's Margaret's story. And it's the story of everyone who has ever been told they can't make a difference, that they're too small, too weak, too insignificant to matter. They're wrong. One person can change the world. One house can hold the truth. One moment of courage can echo through generations. Margaret Holloway proved that. I proved that. And you can prove it too. The garden remembers. And so should we. Sarah set down her pen and closed the notebook. Outside her window, the first stars were appearing in the evening sky. Inside the house that had changed her life, everything was quiet and peaceful. And somewhere, Sarah knew Margaret Holloway was smiling. Because the truth had finally been told. Because justice had finally been served. Because the garden remembered. And because a desperate woman with $200 had walked into an auction, bought an abandoned house, and changed everything. Not because she was special, but because she showed up. And sometimes that's all it takes.